Why, hello, my friends. I have another book thoughts. I was thinking about books that I've read that I haven't heard enough people talk about. And, well, good or bad, really. And the one that I decided I wanted to share with you is the Dwarves series by Markus Heitz, a German author. I have read the first four books. Only five have been translated into English so far. And headline, I enjoy them. I enjoy them quite a bit. So the notion that we have here is it's a Tolkien-esque world, and our main characters are dwarves. Not to say that we don't also deal with humans, and that there aren't elves and orcs and there's wizards. All these things are present, and we do not focus on the dwarves to the exclusion of all else. It starts off quite Tolkien-esque. Tolkien-esque with a dwarf focus. So this world, as we begin, at the very beginning of with the prologue, which takes place long before the outset of the actual narrative, we have a world that has an equilibrium. There is a ring of mountains around a protected region where the humans and the elves live. The dwarves man the mountains, and they keep the mountains from being passed by all of the evil creatures that live on the outside. Your orcs and your giants and your dark elves. And the system breaks down during the prologue, and evil is able to cross into the mountains. So that's our basic setup. The world gets continually less Tolkien as additional wrinkles are put in place. Less Tolkien, but also still very Tolkien. Your evil wizards, your dragons, those are still very Tolkien-esque, even though they are later changes. But whenever you start to getting into wounds in the world that seem to go down into a hellscape and things like that, less Tolkien. So that's the world. And most of our world building is about the dwarves. The dwarves have 5 tribes. These tribes are very regimented, and they have their own cultures. They each focus on a different part of dwarfiness, whether that's stone cutting, jewelry working, fighting, masonry, or that'd be stone cutting, metalwork, so on. They each focus on one of these things, and it is a good time. I must say right now, I am an incurable dwarf lover. I love dwarves in all kinds of fiction. So this was made for me. But I'm going to say that it executes it very well. It captures what I love about dwarves so well. Their obstinance, their ingenuity, so on and so on and so on. And I don't want to talk too much about some of the world building that happens later on, because almost every bit of it is a reveal. It changes things in a dramatic way. So I don't want to spoil those. So each book ends with the situation being much better, and then begins with some dramatic reversal of the situation. I found that by the 4th book, it felt like we had reached an equilibrium, and that equilibrium was ripped away from me for the purposes of narrative moving forwards. It didn't feel authentic. But that was a minor complaint. It did sit with me, but that was a relatively minor complaint, because we did get to experience more dwarves and more of the world and all of that. We start off with our main character being a dwarf out of his own culture. He was raised by a human, and he, as a dwarf, feels like he needs to constantly prove his dwarfiness. And he ends up going on an epic adventure, and he becomes, an ideal dwarf in his own way, not following anyone else's way. He's our bright-eyed, bushy-tailed adventurer in the first book, And as we go along to these other books, he really breaks down. It's very German in the way that our heroes being exposed to horrible things over and over again wear them down to nothing while still being Tolkien-esque. It's a very interesting tension in the writing, and I actually really enjoyed that. It's sad, but in a satisfying way. The writing itself is not, well, in translation at least, is not overly complicated. It flows quite well, I would say. The prose flows quite well and is good at capturing the spirit and essence of what you're seeing, without going into long and tedious descriptions. Everything that was put before me, I felt was illuminated well in my mind's eye, and I never felt that any points were belabored. Our characters are distinct and different, and I think while they may lean a little heavy on being archetypes, I think that works for this kind of play on Tolkien that we have here. Our berserker type, well, there's problems with that. There's real problems, right? There's wrinkles. They're archetypes, but there's wrinkles to it. Not enough that it moves away from being archetypes, but still. As a fantasy book, I'd be amiss if I didn't talk about the nature of magic. I did mention wizards. This is indeed a high magic setting. We start off with a selection of incredibly powerful wizards that need to actually manage directly and regulate the magical fields. Things change as the series goes on, but they are incredibly powerful individuals, and magic stays incredibly powerful throughout the series, even if the exact rules of it change from book to book. I would say that it makes the mages formidable, but they are never quite the focus. Even whenever you have an evil mage, an evil mage is a challenge, to be sure, but there is always something to it that makes them not the primary challenge. Whether it's some manner of corruption or some larger threat. I will also say that that corruption is a big theme, that corruption is a literal thing that plays out in a variety of ways. Finally, the nature of magic and religion is perhaps convoluted and not adequately explored for someone who's in it for magic systems. It's explored enough for the dwarves, and the dwarves are who we primarily care about. An important part of this is definitely that corruption, as I mentioned it, is directly connected to certain gods. Gods are credited with creation of specific races and things, and it is likely true. The religious aspects are not background, they're not flavor, they are fundamental rules of the world building. Perhaps people don't have the correct story or the full story, or perhaps they do, and there's just more stories. These things are never adequately explained, at least up until book 4, up through book 4 rather. I don't know if it gets into it more in the rest of the series, but it doesn't seem like that kind of deal. It's the world building serves the purposes it needs to in the story, For example, we primarily in the first book we focus on our region that is ringed by mountains, and what's inside it, the mountains, and just the few steps outside it, basically. And we are never, as for me, I'm curious. I'm immediately curious. Is this the only safe place in the world? Is the rest of the world destroyed? Are there other rings of mountains, with dwarves standing on them that protect another valley of peace? These things are never really explored in a way that, as a fan of overly complicated world building, I find satisfying. However, it is explored to the extent that it is needed exactly for the stories being told. And in that, it manages a level of self-consistency, so the world building is not being done willy-nilly. Yes, it is just what these stories are about is dwarves doing dwarvy things, and all details added are for the furtherment of the story of the dwarves doing dwarvy things. So those are my quick thoughts on this. I would say that I recommend these books. They aren't my favorite books. They aren't books that I think stand out as, fantastic examples of this, that, or the other. They're just genuinely pleasing fantasy action adventure stories that happen to be about a bunch of dwarves mostly. There are some humans along for the ride as well. Actually, some of the characters are fantastic. But yes, that's what I'm going to say. Well, there's some other characters of other races that sometimes are along for the ride as well, too. Anyway, that'd be spoilers to talk about. Just for the sake of the record, the books that I have read are The Dwarves, The War of the Dwarves, The Revenge of the Dwarves, and The Fate of the Dwarves. I did not know about The Triumph of the Dwarves, and we'll need to hunt that down. Additionally, it looks like 4 more books have been published in German, but have yet to make it to English. So I will wait expectantly. That's it for this Book Thoughts. Let me know if you've read The Dwarves, or if you have any more questions about The Dwarves, or if you just want me to occasionally hop in and talk more about older series that I've read, things that I've read in the past that I just, think maybe you should hear about. Give this video a like and subscribe if you want to hear more. See more like this. That's all I have for now. Bye-bye.